Arcila. What's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? Juan Arcila.
You are at the peak of your first roller coaster ride. Your heart violently palpitates as you look down, seconds before you propel 300 feet below. You're at a coffee shop. 5 minutes before your first date with that special someone you can't keep out of your mind. You're at home at your dining room table. You're hesitant to check the bank balance the morning after Black Friday shopping. What do all of these scenarios have in common? The fear and anxiety of not knowing what's going to happen next. Madam Contest Master, fellow Toastmasters and esteemed guests, do you ever feel life can be like a game show sometimes? If your life was like a game show, what would it be? Would it be like Jeopardy? Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Or Family Feud? I asked my dad that same question. He said, son, it's a little bit like all three. In the mornings, during rush hour, I feel like my life is in jeopardy on my commute to work. Once I do get to work, all I can think about is being in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And once I get back home from work to your mother, I feel like I'm in Family Feud. Personally though, if my life was a game show, it would be titled, What's Going to Happen Next? I can remember the first time I asked myself that question. Let's rewind back to the year 2002. My family and I had just moved to the United States from Colombia. We were about to begin a new chapter in our lives. After my first day of school, however, I went back home in tears. I went to my dad and said, Dad, I feel so different from the other kids. I don't know how to make friends with them. What should I do? My dad sat me down and said, son, you've always been a very emotional kid, and you always jump to a conclusion. I don't blame you. You get that from your mother. Starting tomorrow morning, I want you to be the one to make the first move. Start a conversation with someone new. You'll be surprised what you can learn from them. The next day, during lunch, I was debating whether to talk to a group of students sitting at a table. I was terrified of approaching them. What's going to happen next? Immediately, I thought of the worst possible scenarios. I imagined them throwing a food tray at my face, making fun of my accent, or telling me to go back home to Colombia. But I remembered my father's words. I nervously went up to them and said hello. And to my surprise, they didn't do any of those horrible things I imagined. They were actually very friendly. By the end of the lunch period, we were practically best friends. My dad was right. I learned we had a lot more in common than I thought. I also learned that we don't have to let our differences keep us apart. In fact, if we embrace them, our differences can bring us together. And that lesson today is just as true as it was back then. Now, a few years later, I found myself in a very similar predicament, but this time with my mother. You see, I was a pretty decent student up until my junior year of high school, when I took my first physics class. I went from getting A's and B's to getting C's, D's, and to my great shame, my first F. When I saw the report card, that F stood out like a scarlet letter to me. That afternoon, my mother was waiting for me at home. As soon as I got through the doors, I made no eye contact with her and made a beeline towards my room. But why is it that mothers always know when it's report card day? She yelled, "Stop right there, mister. Turn around and give me the goods." As I turned around, my heart dropped. I was afraid of letting her down. I was afraid of disappointing her. I was afraid of looking like a failure in front of my eyes. And once again I asked, what's going to happen next? Immediately I thought of the worst possible scenarios again. I thought she was going to barricade me in my room for the entirety of my high school years. I thought she was going to make me do more chores. Or worse than anything else, sell all my video games. You can tell what my priorities were at that time. But what happened next was really surprising. She sat me down and said, "Juan, you've always been very stubborn, and you always want to do things on your own. I don't blame you. You get that from your father. Starting tomorrow afternoon, you are going to a tutor. The next time you bring a report card home, I want to see improvements." My mother told me a very valuable lesson. Sometimes you have to put our pride and ego aside and be willing to reach out to others in our greatest times of need. Now, that tutor helped raise my F average all the way to a C. But C's get degrees, and I was able to pass the class. My friends, life can be like a game show. Sometimes we're thrown in situations where we're not sure what's going to happen next. But why is it that in game shows, when faced with the unknown, people always hope for the best? But in life, we assume the worst. We may not always be in control of the things that happen to us in our lives, but we are always in control of how we react to those moments. And we can choose to learn something from them. Maybe you learn to love that thrilling feeling of excitement when that roller coaster came to a halting stop. Or not, and you never went on a roller coaster ever again. But at least you learned that about yourself. Maybe you were pleasantly surprised after the first date you were nervous about, and that special someone became a partner or a spouse. And maybe the only thing to learn from seeing our bank account in the red is that we shouldn't get so trigger happy with the credit card during the holidays. My friends, you may have not immigrated to a new country. You may have not failed the physics class. But each and every one of us here have been in moments that has cost us just as much fear and anxiety. And in the future, when you face those moments again, I hope you assume the best. You too may be pleasantly surprised when you ask yourself, what's going to happen next? Madam Toastmaster.